Okay, so I have a new mix of colors I'm going to be trying for a spiral straight pour. We'll see how this turns out. I have Artist Loft Aqua Green for my background slash base coat. I have DecoArt Americana Decor Metallics in Emerald. This is a beautiful color. I have the same in Sapphire and Sterling Silver. The silver doesn't typically make cells like the Emerald or the Sapphire does, but it does have some really cool effects. And I have Amsterdam Acrylics in Pearl Yellow. So I have had some luck with the pearls creating cells in a straight pour. We'll see what happens. I might just get some lacing in between cells because the DecoArt paints are a very strong cell maker. We'll see what happens. That's why I say it's an experiment. I don't know how these colors will react with each other. And so there is an endless amount of color combinations and paint combinations that I could try. That's why I keep doing the straight pours, because I want to see how each paint can react differently and give different effects. And I like to test all of that out. So we know the paint colors. These paints are mixed 1 part paint to 2 parts Floetrol. And that mixture is then thinned with water. I use distilled water, or you can use a mixture of Floetrol and water, 10% Floetrol to 90% water. If you are kind of new, that is a good option. You'll be less likely to mix it too thin. So I'll use this color. This is the consistency that we're looking for. This is a 2 on my consistency scale. It is making a mound, but it disappears pretty quickly. And it is making a nice, thin, even stream off of my stick. If it is getting thin and then thick and thin, then your consistency is inconsistent and you need to keep mixing. Before we get started, have you seen the Fluid Art inspiration cards? If you have, you can fast forward about a minute, but if you have not, what we have are 52 cards. There are 42 technique cards, and each technique card has an associated video here on YouTube that gives you all of the information that you need, the exact paint brand, color, consistency, the recipe, of course the technique, all of the things that I can't fit onto a card. This is the picture of the painting in that technique. In this case, it's 2 pictures because it's black light reactive. This box contains a tip for this particular technique, and here at the bottom, you have the color palette that was used in this painting. And these 2 boxes can be used together as the basis of a 2-color palette, or you can build off of those colors. And there are 8 bonus color palette cards. Each one has 5 color palettes. You can use all of the colors or just some of the colors. Mix and match the bonus color palette cards with the technique cards, and you have more combinations than you could ever paint in a lifetime. These are available at my website, ginadeluca.net, and also at amazon.com. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is put some paint in my cup. I want to make sure that I have enough for my paints to react with. I'm going to do about 2 ounces in here. If I don't do that, sometimes I put too much on the canvas and I don't leave enough for my pour. I also want to leave enough to top off my cup after I put my other colors in, and to leave a bit for the edges in case I need a bit more juice to get the paint puddle to the corners. You'll notice I've already covered my edges. I do that because I mix these paints pretty thin, and I'm also using Floetrol. that combination does not give the best coverage on the sides. So instead of coming back later and having to touch up my sides, I just make sure they're covered before I get started. And that is a thing I don't have to worry about later. I like to troubleshoot before there's trouble. Save myself extra work later on. Sometimes I am using a custom blended color for my background / base coat. And if that is the case, it is much harder to perfectly match those colors. So this way my sides are covered no matter what happens. Don't have to worry about it. That is also the reason why I use the same color background as I do base coat. If I am not, like say, I used a white base coat and there's no white in my painting, if there are bubbles left in my base coat, they may come up in my puddle after I stretch. They come up through my pour, and then I wind up with these little tiny white cells that I feel like I need to come back later and fix. This eliminates that. More troubleshooting. Okay. And the reason we lay down a base coat is because we want our paints to slide around evenly and easily. Something has to stick to the canvas first, and if it is not your base coat, it will be your poured paint puddle, and then the center will roll over the edges and you lose your edges. You might want to keep that in your composition. Another good reason to use the same color background as your base coat, or base coat as your background, because if I want to have negative space, the color that is in my cup goes along very well with the color that is already on the canvas. Going to pop these bubbles. They may seem like unnecessary steps, but if it saves you time in the end, even if it just potentially saves you time in the end, it is worth it. All right, going to put some paint in a cup. I'm going to pour from up high. I want the paints to sink and churn and blend. That can give me some really cool boulder cells. Always checking the consistency before adding to the cup. The sauce may thicken upon standing. And if it is sitting long enough, I would say it will thicken upon standing. These colors are ocean inspired. I do like pulling from nature for my color palettes, because I think she knows better than I do, that Mother Nature, about what colors look good together. Okay, and this is the Amsterdam Pearl paint. I like to put the color that I want to end up in the center of my painting. I put that in last for some reason. A little bit of that ends up at the very bottom of my cup, and that ends up in the center of my painting. It gets stretched out and becomes the focal point. So pouring from up high. Hopefully that made it to the bottom. It didn't quite give me the plop that I like to hear, but I'm gonna have faith. Just going to add a bit of this to the top to make sure that all of the cell makers have some of the background paint for it to react with. What makes these paints react? The DecoArt paints are matte. The Artist Loft paint is glossy. It might be listed as satin, but it is glossier than the satin enamels, or the DecoArt paints, I should say. And so you get a hydrophobic reaction. The matte paints push away the glossy paints, and you end up with cells. Let me readjust this a bit. Okay. I'm going to try to stay in the center. Trying to spin evenly while staying in the center. I don't recommend a whole lot of coffee before you try this. As I get towards the end of the cup, I will get closer to the canvas and it will come out of the cup slower. So I spin slower. Here comes one of the light colored paints. I don't know if it's the silver or the pearl paints. Tucker is getting into something he shouldn't, but I cannot focus on that at this moment. I'm gonna have to yell at him briefly. Maybe he heard me say his name. He's my brown banana. He's very rotten, but he's very sweet. My Tucker. Okay, 10 on the dismount. Good spiral going there. All right, so far, so good. Happy with this. I think when this gets stretched out, even if it looks exactly the way it does right now, it will look cool. I'm going to lose a lot of what happens on the edge. That's why we lay down a base coat. Say something amazing happened right here, and I wanted to keep that. I could just stretch all of this way and really accentuate that and leave some negative space. Popping the bubbles. So what's going to happen here? I'm popping bubbles. Some of these bubbles are coming from underlying layers of paint, and it is going to bring paint up with it. That's why we use a base coat that is the same color as something in our painting. So if I have little bubbles coming up from my base coat, it's not going to stand out because this color is already in here. But what happens is I pop these bubbles and it brings up some of that paint with it. And because they are matte paints, they're going to push away those glossier paints. It's going to have a hydrophobic effect. It's going to push away those glossy paints and those cells will grow. So that is why I don't spin right away. I want to let these cells have an opportunity to grow before I stretch the paint. This will give me bigger cells, and this will give me more interesting shapes to my cells. If I were to stretch it right away, I will end up with pearl cells. They're very cool, but they're pretty uniform in their shape. Like that's basically what these will be if I don't do anything, if I just let them come up. But if I allow them to develop first, let my paint puddle percolate. Oh, see, I'm coming off my side here. Let me make sure that I just need to make sure my center is centered. Whatever else happens, that is the most important thing. Because I'm doing a spiral. If this were another style of painting, it wouldn't really matter all that much, unless I'm doing a flower or something. But I like, for my spirals, I like my spiral to be the focal point. And typically, I don't want my focal point in the center, unless I'm doing one of these. If I'm doing something on a round canvas, I prefer my focal point in the center. That's just me. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's just what makes my ADHD brain very happy. But if it were a rectangle, I would probably be using the rule of thirds and pulling it in one direction. So you'll see as this sits, more bubbles keep arising, coming close to the top, and I can see them just sitting under there, so I pop them. I'm not hitting the center with the torch. I don't want random cells popping up in there. I like what's happening. So I'm going to leave that be. I've got some nice boulder cell action going on here between that green and can't tell if it's the sterling or the yellow. I think it might be both, actually. The pearl yellow. And truthfully, it will be really hard to tell until this thing is dried and varnished. It is once it's varnished, it really brings it out. Because I'm using matte paints, they look very dull when they dry. When you're using Floetrol, that has a bit of a mattifying effect on its own. And yes, when your paintings dry, they lose their luster. They don't look nearly as beautiful as they do when they're wet, but when you varnish them, it will come back to life, especially if you're using metallics or anything of a shimmery nature. The more layers of varnish you put down, the more light refraction you will get, and the blingier it will be. Okay, well, I think I like what's going on. I think I have enough here to stretch and create some really interesting effects. This is going to be really pretty. Going to give one more pop. And then I'm going to touch up my sides. This has been sitting for a minute. The sides can set up a bit. I like to make sure that they are all still equally moisturized. Because if there is a spot on the side that has set up, then it will resist the paint flowing over easily. We don't want that. So again, just taking a little bit of time to do these extra steps will really save you some headaches later on. You know, these extra steps, maybe they take an extra 5 minutes to do these things while you're painting. Maybe it's an extra 5 minutes. But my goodness, can it save you a lot of time later on when you don't have to come back and touch things up after it's dried. Okay, so I still have a bit left here, so I'm just gonna put a little more juice on those corners. That can really help it to slide. The corners are always going to be the toughest spots. 'Tis the nature of a thing with a corner and paint pouring. Okay. I think we should be good. Good and juiced up there. One more pop of Z Bubbles. And these paints are such good cell makers, I might barely have any of this background color left. That is possible. Sometimes they just eat it all up and they take over. All right, I think we're ready to give this a twirl, shall we? This is the part that doesn't take long at all. It's the waiting, being patient. Patience is your friend when it comes to straight pours, I promise you. Okay, so I have a spot right here that's like not wanting to pull over the side. And I can see that it looks a little bit dry there. So let me make sure that is not the case anymore. And it should come over easily. Okay, so this corner is like the last one that's kind of wanting to get coverage. So I'm going to push the canvas in that direction a little bit. This is like being on the merry-go-round at the playground. The closer you are to the edge, the more you are getting pulled. When you're in the center, you don't really get pulled as much. Almost there. Okay. I don't want to spin this anymore. I don't want to lose that. I love that. I want that to stay the way it is. So what I can do, I'm just going to take some of these drippings and just kind of scooch it right over that corner. And you would never know. The very, very corners are kind of tricky. Even if you're using a ton of paint, those very tips of the corners don't like to be covered. So we'll just do that by hand. This was definitely more paint than what I needed. When I'm mixing full cups, I can measure it out pretty easily, but I was only mixing, it was supposed to be half cups, and they probably wound up being more of a 3/4 cup. So I wound up with more paint than I needed. It's all right. The painting's coming out beautifully. I love what's happening. Very happy with how this is turning out. I'm going to leave this alone and see what happens. I'm sure I'm going to be getting more cells popping up. I can see them already. So it may very well just swallow up that aqua. Maybe it won't. We'll find out. Back in a few. Okay, here it is. As you can see, more cells have popped up and filled in that space. There is a bit of the aqua still showing, just enough to kind of give it that backlit glow. I do wish a bit more of it had stayed visible, but these cells are beautiful, awesome 3D boulder cell action. I love boulder cells. I love how the paints attach to each other and give you these multicolored cells that appear very 3D. I am pleased with how this turned out. Not mad at this at all. But there it is. I hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something. If you did, please do like and share. Sharing is caring. That is really helpful to get the creators out to new audiences. Feel free to comment about color combinations you might like to see in the future, or techniques that you'd like to see me try. Do be sure, if you are a subscriber, that you have clicked that bell so you are receiving notifications when I put up new content. A lot of my subscribers are not being notified. This has been a problem. I have 165,000 followers and can barely break 1,000 views. So I can only assume that people are not being notified. What else is there? Check out the description box below for links to my PayPal tip jar if you feel so inclined, my website, GinaDeLuca.net, where you can find my art and music and fluid art inspiration cards for sale. You will also find in the description box my affiliate links, DecoArt being one of them. There are several affiliate links in there. There are coupon codes that you can grab. If you want the full selection of these DecoArt paints, the website is the place to go. I find that most stores have a limited selection. You will also find in the description box the link to our Facebook group, Go Make Some Art. Join us there, post your masterpieces, ask your questions, get some inspiration. A good time is had by most. It is the internet after all. Is that it? Is there more? I'm not sure. I usually forget something during my wrap up. It just kind of works out that way. I think that's it. Well, I'll just call it. Check out the description box if I forgot anything. It'll be in there. All right. That is it for me for today. I hope you all have a beautiful day. Now go make some art.